So I know I posted a video earlier today, and I usually don't like to do double uploads, but I thought this was an interesting piece of news that just dropped. Less of a news story and still rumors at this point, to be fair, but these are two leakers that are known for consistently giving reliable information that turns out to be true later on, from Nick Baker and Jeff Grubb, two names that a lot of you may be familiar with because they're among the most credible and reliable leakers in the industry, especially Jeff Grubb. But according to them, Sony is developing backwards compatibility for the PlayStation 3 and is going to announce it at the PlayStation Showcase in September, which I'm like, okay, a few weeks ago, they just had a press conference and they had nothing to show for it. One of the most boring press conferences in all of video game history. It was horrible. So you think then that would have been a great time to announce this, but they didn't. This is great depending on how this actually gets implemented. The indication is that it's not going to be full backwards compatibility, which anyone could have guessed. This is a software emulator, not hardware emulation, so it's not going to have full backwards compatibility as a result, similar to the backwards compatibility that was implemented by Microsoft for the Xbox One and Series X when it comes to Xbox 360 and Xbox One games, or original Xbox rather, because those are software emulators, while the Xbox One games that are playable on Series X, that's all hardware emulation, so that's why you have pretty much the entire Xbox One game library, except for a few Kinect games that you can't play without the Kinect, and the Kinect is not compatible with the Series X. But with the 360, it's only a select number, a fraction of the entire Xbox 360 game library. And what typically happens is a lot of games where the license is expired, it's no longer being sold, maybe the company went out of business or whatever. Sports games is another thing where the license only lasts a few years and then it gets delisted. Those games are the ones that get the most affected because backwards compatibility is a thing that's supposed to preserve games, and it does preserve a lot of them. That's what happened with the 360 games, especially the old school COD games that are still played and still popular to this day because of the backwards compatibility. But it is not extensive. It's not robust, like to the point where you're preserving as many games as possible. They have to make a compromise, because if they put a PlayStation 3 into the PS5, then the PS5 would be a lot more expensive. And also, the strategy is, if it's a software emulator, then they could digitize all those games, which would increase revenue for the PlayStation Store. I don't know if they're going to do a similar thing where if you already own a disc, that the console will be able to read it and say that you own the game instead of you having to buy it again, because Sony's approach with a lot of these games, so they have a lot of PlayStation 1 games and PlayStation 2 games that are now available on the PS5. Sly Cooper was just released a few weeks ago, and that game, you have to buy it, or it's like part of your subscription, but you have to pay for it separately. It's not like, oh, I have an old disc of Sly Cooper and I can insert it into the console and Sony will accept it and let me play the game. They won't. So I think, based off of that, I think it's a safe assumption that what we already see with the PS2 games, we're going to see again with the PS3 games on PS5. And, you know, a lot of the time they implement it as part of, like, the PlayStation Plus Premium, where it's included with your subscription. That'll be a way to increase subscription numbers, but also, you know, you could buy it separately, so that'll also increase revenue for them, because the PlayStation 3 has one of the most iconic game libraries in all of history. Out of all the consoles, the PlayStation 3 has one of the best, because they were struggling at first against the Xbox 360 and the Wii, and, you know, no one wanted a PS3, so they had to fight and claw their way back into the console market, and the big way they did that was releasing a shit ton of high-quality first-party exclusives that you could not play anywhere else on any other platform. Games like Little Big Planet, Infamous, Ratchet & Clank, Killzone, Resistance, and even smaller indie-style games like Fat Princess and Pixel Junk were also very good games. There was just a lot of really good ones on the PS3, and since the launch of the PS4, really the only games that they have brought back and remastered were the Naughty Dog games, so Uncharted and The Last of Us. Other than that, though, we haven't gotten any re-releases or anything like that, and I've always viewed that as a huge missed opportunity for Sony because the PlayStation brand has such a deep and rich legacy, over 30 years of amazing games, and a lot of them exclusive games that you couldn't play anywhere else. I'm really surprised that it's taken them this long to try to start and get money out of that nostalgia that people have. The one thing I will say, though, is that I do hope that when it comes to the PS3, that there are control options so you don't have to use the shoulder buttons to shoot, because that would translate horribly onto the DualSense controller, and also 60 FPS. A lot of these games are locked at 30 frames, and they do not hold up. They do not really stand the test of time because of that. And I think, yeah, like, it's feasible because the Series X does have a 60 FPS boost for a lot of these games that were originally locked at 30 on the 360. Think of Red Dead Redemption 1, Sonic Unleashed. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other ones that I can't think of right now. So it's possible that Sony can do that. Hopefully they do, because I don't know, though, because they have a lot of games coming out now on the PS5 that are locked at 30, and they seem completely fine with that. So I don't know. That's going to be a stretch there to have a 60 FPS boost for PS3 games, but that would honestly be the number one thing that would be enticing for me to go back and play these games. I don't even have a PS5 right now. Probably never going to get one. But you know what? Something like this would make me be like, It honestly would. It would make me be like, maybe I should reconsider and get one. I mean, I've been pretty disappointed and just underwhelmed, I guess you could say, with the PS2 backwards compatibility, whatever you want to call it, what they do right now with the PS5, because what I can do right now on my PC emulator, PCSX2, I can play pretty much every PS2 game, and it looks and runs so much better on my PC than it does on the whatever they have on the PS5. And I could also play the entire PS2 library pretty much, and I'm not just restricted by what Sony decides to put on the PS5. But with this, there's a chance, if it's like a really good emulator, that it can be better than the PS3 emulator that still has a long way to go when it comes to a lot of these games that they don't run properly, or you need like an insanely powerful PC in order to really be able to run it well. Some people can run it well, but again, like, there's still, like, as far as compatibility, the emulator is still only compatible with, I think, about like 60% of the PS3 library, and it varies between system, obviously, graphics, card, and everything like that. But even then, it'll still probably be able to play a lot more PS3 games on PC than you can on PlayStation 5. I can't imagine they're going to launch a whole bunch of PS3 games. Like, you're not even going to get all of the Sony first-party games, never mind a lot of the third-party games that also made the PS3 great. PC's probably still going to be the best way to play PlayStation games, between the emulators probably being better than what Sony's going to offer on their own system and their own console, and also they're releasing PS5 games on the PC on Steam. So there's no exclusives anymore. Also, online multiplayer is another thing. A lot of these games had really good online modes. I mean, Uncharted 2 and Uncharted 3 were some of the best multiplayer experiences that the PS3 ever had. MAG, that's a game that got shut down years ago. Mod Nation Racers, anyone remember that one? But they've all been shut down, and like, the multiplayer is a huge part of a lot of these games, and them just having the single player mode, which I think is what's going to happen here, is going to be very disappointing also. I mean, that's exactly what they did. They've shown how little they care about preserving these online multiplayers with the release of Uncharted 2 and Uncharted 3 on the PS4, which came with no multiplayer, and their bogus explanation for that was that they didn't want to split the community. Like, having the game on PS3 and PS4 would split the player base up, and it would be such a horrible thing. Meanwhile, a couple years after that, they shut down the PS3 version. So there's no online anymore for that game. And yes, I'm still fucking mad about that, in case you guys can't tell. So I'm prepared to be let down. I don't think this is going to be as great as it sounds that people are making it out to be. I think it's going to be a big letdown, honestly, the way that they implement this, because it's Sony, and I'm used to mediocrity at this point. But all in all, this is a good business move, something that I actually predicted would eventually come. I think this was back in like 2017 or 2018 that I said that the PS5 would have backwards compatibility for the PS3, and everyone thought I was crazy, And, back then I was because they weren't really working on it at the time, but now they seemingly are. But yeah, they did a report saying that 90% of all games, 90% of games released before 2010 are no longer accessible in 2024. Now, you could still buy them like used on eBay if you have the original hardware, but we're talking about modern systems and there being a way to purchase the game from the company, like whether we're talking about a digital store or whatever. Like, most of these games are not there anymore. It's just a free license to print money. I don't understand why this hasn't been rolled out. Microsoft has done a good job for the most part. There's still a lot more that they could have done, but it's still a lot more than what Sony and Nintendo were doing. And Nintendo used to be the best at this shit. They had the Virtual Console on the Wii, which was fan-fucking-tastic. It was everything I could have ever wanted in a console selling legacy games on their platform. Like, I don't know. Why did they regress? They went backwards. On the Wii U, they didn't have nearly as many games, the Virtual Console. And the Switch has this weird thing where, like, oh yeah, they'll give you a few NES games for a subscription fee, like, that you pay for the paid online. I think it's like $20 a year, and that's just such a small library compared to what the Wii offered 20 years ago at this point. Like, how are we going backwards 20 years later? I really don't understand. But that's what seems to be happening when it comes to game preservation, and it's beyond frustrating. But hopefully Sony can deliver something good for the consumer, something really cool that will help keep these games alive for many years to come.